It's 1937. Peacetime. Joseph Stalin begins executing his own generals. Not for losing battles, there is no war yet. Not for treason. Most are fanatically loyal communists. He kills them because competence terrifies him more than incompetence. By 1938, 3 of 5 marshals are executed. 13 of 15 army commanders, gone. 50 of 57 corps commanders, eliminated. 154 of 195 division commanders, dead. Over 20,000 officers shot or sent to gulags. 3 years later, Nazi Germany invades. Stalin's purged army almost collapses in 6 months. Hitler fires his best generals during the war for disagreeing with him. Stalin kills his best generals before the war starts, for crimes they didn't commit. Here's how Stalin's paranoia nearly handed Hitler the Soviet Union. If you want to understand how authoritarian systems destroy themselves from within, hit subscribe, because this channel breaks down the mechanics of power and the cost of purging competence. Marshal Mikhail Tukhachevsky is the Red Army's most brilliant strategist. He modernized Soviet military doctrine, championed mechanized warfare, understood combined arms operations before most Western generals. He's also charismatic, popular with officers, and intellectually intimidating. Everything Stalin is not. Tukhachevsky champions deep battle theory, tactics emphasizing speed, encirclement, and coordination between tanks, infantry, and air power. These ideas threaten Stalin's circle of cronies, cavalry commanders from the Civil War who prefer horses to tanks and ideology to innovation. June 11th, 1937, Tukhachevsky is arrested. The charges: conspiring with Nazi Germany, planning a military coup, espionage. But Stalin doesn't need evidence. Tukhachevsky is too competent, too independent. The interrogation files tell the real story. Brown splatters on his confession papers. Forensic analysis confirms it's blood, spattered as he's beaten into submission. June 12th, 1 day after arrest, Tukhachevsky is executed. Within weeks, the purge cascades. Marshal Vasily Blyuka, executed. Marshal Alexander Yegorov, executed. When an officer is arrested, he's tortured to name co-conspirators. A single arrest triggers dozens of denunciations as victims frantically name colleagues to stop the pain. Officers stop training and start writing denunciations to preempt their own arrest. Initiative dies because any deviation from outdated tactics can be labeled sabotage. Families are targeted too. Wives and children of purged officers are arrested, exiled, or sent to the gulag. By 1938, the Red Army's intellectual foundation, deep battle theory, mechanized warfare, combined arms tactics, has been purged along with the men who created it. Stalin has gutted his military 3 years before the test. November 1939, the Soviet Union invades Finland. The Red Army fields over 1 million troops, thousands of tanks, total air superiority. Finland has 200,000 soldiers, outdated equipment, no tanks. It should be quick, but officers who survived the purges now command units 2 grades above their experience. Battalion commanders lead divisions. Lieutenants lead regiments. They're terrified of creativity because it might be labeled sabotage. The result? Frontal assaults, wave after wave into Finnish machine guns. No maneuver, no adaptation. Finnish ski troops, mobile and intimate with the terrain, slaughter the Soviet attackers. Official Soviet casualties: over 320,000 dead, wounded, or sick. Finnish losses: 69,000. A 5-to-1 casualty ratio against a nation with a fraction of the population. Adolf Hitler watches this debacle and reaches a conclusion. He tells his generals, "We have only to kick in the door and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down." He believes the Soviet people will rise against Stalin and the purged Red Army will collapse within weeks. The assessment isn't entirely wrong. The structure is rotten in 1940. But Hitler underestimates the Soviet capacity for regeneration and Stalin's brutal mobilization system. June 1942, Hitler visits Finland for Marshal Mannerheim's 75th birthday. A Finnish sound engineer secretly records 11 minutes of their private conversation. It's the only known recording of Hitler speaking conversationally, no rhetorical shouting. He sounds shaken, defensive. If somebody had told me a nation could start with 35,000 tanks, I'd have said, "You are crazy." We have destroyed more than 34,000 tanks. It was unbelievable. The rotten structure didn't collapse. It was churning out thousands of T-34 tanks. The quiet voice of Hitler making excuses is more damning than any propaganda speech. June 22, 1941. 3 million German soldiers cross the Soviet border. This isn't a surprise. Stalin received over 80 specific warnings. His spy master in Tokyo, Richard Sorge, sent detailed intelligence about the invasion date. Stalin's response: he dismisses Sorge as a bastard who set up factories and brothels in Japan. Intelligence is filtered through Stalin's prejudices. Truth is rejected because it comes from a morally compromised source. Stalin is obsessed with the idea that British intelligence is trying to trick him into attacking Germany first. He refuses to mobilize, refuses full alert, orders commanders not to yield to provocations. General Dmitry Pavlov, commander of the Western Front, is in Kiev on June 21st. He's at a theater watching a comedy play. He sits through the performance even as reports of German engines pour in. It's a surreal denial. Soviet leadership pretending normalcy as the world ends. June 22nd, the Western Front collapses. German panzers encircle entire Soviet armies at Białystok and Minsk. For the first week, Stalin works frantically in his office, 14-hour days, issuing contradictory orders. Then, Minsk falls. The scale becomes undeniable. June 29th, Stalin explodes at his generals, then retreats to his dacha. He mutters, "Lenin left us a great legacy and we have fucked it up." June 30th, Molotov, Beria, and Voroshilov drive to the dacha. When Stalin sees them, he shrinks into his chair. "Why have you come?" Stalin believes they've come to arrest him. In his own system, failure of this magnitude warrants execution. Instead, they beg him to lead. Once Stalin realizes he's safe, he reasserts control. But 3 to 4 million Soviet soldiers become casualties in 6 months. Dead, wounded, captured. Stalin needs a scapegoat. July 22nd, Pavlov is shot and buried in a landfill, 1 month after the invasion. The execution terrifies other commanders. Fearful of being shot for unauthorized retreat, generals allow armies to be encircled rather than pull back. At Kiev in September, 600,000 troops are lost because no one dares retreat without Stalin's permission. But Stalin starts adapting. He realizes loyalty without competence loses wars. Konstantin Rokossovsky was arrested in August 1937, charged with spying for Poland and Japan. For 3 years, he's held in Leningrad's Kresty prison. NKVD interrogators knock out 9 of his front teeth. They crack his ribs. They pull out his fingernails. He's subjected to 2 mock firing squads, led into the yard at night expecting death, only to hear blanks. But Rokossovsky refuses to sign a false confession. When told Officer Yushkevich testified against him, Rokossovsky retorts that Yushkevich had been dead for years. His torturers missed this fact. This stubbornness saves him. March 1940, desperate after Finland, Stalin orders Rokossovsky's release. He's sent to a spa to recover his health, given a new uniform, and quietly reinstated. When they meet again, Stalin asks where he's been. Rokossovsky tells him the truth. "In prison, Comrade Stalin." Stalin's reply is almost casual. "A fine time you chose to go to prison." The gallows humor masks the horror. Stalin knows exactly what happened to Rokossovsky, and Rokossovsky knows Stalin ordered it. But the war demands competence now, not loyalty. Rokossovsky defends Moscow, plans Operation Bagration, destroys Army Group Center. During Bagration planning in 1944, Stalin proposes a single-thrust strategy. Rokossovsky argues for dual thrust. The old Stalin would have shot him for insubordination. Instead, Stalin tells him to step out of the room and think it over. When Rokossovsky returns and repeats his recommendation, Stalin accepts it. The dual thrust works. Army Group Center is annihilated. By 1943, Stalin has shifted to meritocracy. Success is rewarded with survival and autonomy. He arbitrates disputes between marshals rather than executing the loser. June 1945, Victory Parade in Red Square. Rokossovsky rides a black stallion commanding the parade while Stalin watches from Lenin's mausoleum. The man tortured in the NKVD basement now commands the greatest army on earth, wearing dentures where his real teeth used to be, a permanent reminder of what the system did to him. While Stalin learns to trust competence, Hitler learns to hate it. In 1939, the Wehrmacht enjoys operational autonomy. But as the war turns, Hitler's behavior mimics Stalin's 1937 mode. Winter 1941. The German offensive stalls before Moscow. Hitler dismisses his commander-in-chief and takes personal command. He fires generals for unauthorized retreats, stripping them of rank and pension. Stalingrad 1942 solidifies his micromanagement. Obsessed with National Socialist will, Hitler refuses to let the Sixth Army break out. He promotes Friedrich Paulus to field marshal in the siege's final days, specifically because no German field marshal has ever surrendered. It's an order to commit suicide. Paulus surrenders anyway. July 20th, 1944, the failed assassination attempt. The retribution is brutal, swift, theatrical. Conspirators face show trials in the People's Court, where Judge Roland Freisler screams at defendants. Field Marshal Erwin von Witzleben is humiliated, forced to wear ill-fitting clothes, denied false teeth and belt, so he has to hold up his trousers during trial. The executions aren't by firing squad with military honors. They're hanged with piano wire from meat hooks at Plötzensee prison, and the executions are filmed for Hitler to watch. And as we covered in our previous video on Rommel, the Desert Fox, implicated tangentially in the plot, is forced to take cyanide to protect his family. This happens in 1944, while Stalin is showering honors on his marshals. The trajectories have crossed. By war's end, 84 German generals have been executed by the Nazi regime. Fewer than Stalin's thousands, but the timing is fatal. Hitler decapitates his leadership during decisive defeats, accelerating the collapse. The fundamental difference isn't capacity for violence. Both possessed this. It's timing and adaptation. Stalin purged in peacetime, nearly lost in 1941, then adapted under existential threat. He learned that loyal incompetence loses battles. He shifted to meritocracy, success rewarded with survival. Hitler began with professionals who multiplied his ambitions. As the tide turned, he refused to adapt. He viewed professional advice as cowardice and purged during wartime, destroying his command structure when he needed it most. 27 million Soviet citizens died, the highest price any nation paid in the war. A massive portion traces directly to the purges. No experienced officers, catastrophic 1941 losses, desperate human wave tactics to compensate for strategic incompetence. But the Red Army survived because industrial capacity, manpower, and survivors like Rokossovsky held the line until the system stabilized. Stalin eventually learned to delegate. The Wehrmacht didn't survive because Hitler's paranoia, his refusal to listen, his execution of the men who could have saved Germany. These guaranteed defeat. The lesson is universal. You cannot purge competence without consequences. Both systems valued loyalty over ability, obedience over expertise, ideology over professionalism. Stalin killed 20,000 officers and nearly lost the Soviet Union. Hitler killed his best generals and guaranteed Germany's defeat. The dictators, who couldn't tolerate disagreement, destroyed themselves. The pattern is complete. Rommel, competent general, forced suicide for questioning the regime. Manstein, competent general, fired for disagreeing on strategy. Soviet officers, competent professionals, executed for imagined crimes. The same dynamic plays out 3 times. Authoritarian systems destroy competence because competence threatens authority. Hitler waited until his generals became problems. Stalin didn't wait. He killed them before the war even started. The result? The Soviet Union almost collapsed in 1941 because the men who could have defended it were already dead. It survived through industrial might, manpower, and the few survivors Stalin desperately brought back from the Gulag. Hitler began the war with Europe's most professional general staff. He ended it by hanging them with piano wire. Stalin began the war having executed his best military minds. He ended it by giving them operational freedom. One dictator learned, the other didn't. Stalin died in his bed in 1953, 27 million Soviet deaths later. The generals he purged in the Great Terror never saw the victory they could have won with less bloodshed. Hitler died in a bunker in 1945, having destroyed the army that could have saved him. The generals he killed in 1944 were proven right by history. Both paid the price for purging competence, but only one survived to see victory. This completes our trilogy on dictators and their generals. If you want to understand how authoritarian systems destroy themselves from within, hit subscribe. Was Stalin's paranoia worse than Hitler's, or were they both trapped in the same authoritarian logic? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching.